The $70 billion lie. Sand is running out, and it's creating a global crime wave. The excavator's bucket rises dripping at 2 a.m. and the riverbank slumps like a wound. A fisherman kills his engine and goes dark. On shore, a foreman counts cash with one hand and clutches a burner phone with the other. The lie is simple. Sand is endless. It is. The right sand is vanishing where we build, and that gap is turning quiet rivers into battlefields. Homes, roads, hospitals, your phone screen depend on it. Follow the money, the violence, and the cover-ups. Desert dunes won't save us. Someone already knows that. To understand how this lie became normal, go back to the moment concrete quietly took over. Cities didn't choose marble or steel to scale. They chose something cheaper, stackable, and poured by the mile. That choice made a global habit. Sand, gravel, and cement mixed into the modern world. Here's the path we're taking. First, where demand came from, the rebuilds, highways, megacities. Then how legal supply cracked, permits lagging while cranes multiplied. Then who moved in when it jammed, night dredgers, brokers, and officials on the take. We'll show the fallout, banks collapsing, bridges cracking, wells running dry, and test the fixes, industry sells versus the constraints that don't budge. Finally, we'll land on what actually works. Standards, traceability, procurement reform, and design that uses less without stalling growth. One rule runs through it. Sand is cheap until you move it. Weight kills margin. Distance decides profit. So who controls the right sand within trucking range of growth controls the build and the rent, taxes, and insurance that follow. Your city's price tag, your flood risk, even your food security ride on that radius. So to see how the addiction began, we start with concrete's quiet empire and the sprint that locked us in. Concrete's quiet empire, how we got hooked. The day the war ended in Europe, plans for roads began, not the grand speeches ordering forms. Asphalt and concrete would pave soldiers' home and wire farms to markets. By the time shipyards emptied out, mixers were already rolling. Concrete didn't win on glamour, it won on logistics. Local rock, local sand, some cement, water, and labor, stackable everywhere. It hardened as policy turned into slabs. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Ports widened their mouths, runways lengthened, suburbs spread. When the U.S. interstates cut across states in the late 1950s and 1960s, the model exported itself. Highways as arteries, warehouses as nodes, cul-de-sacs as capillaries. Concrete became a language countries used to say we're moving. It was cheaper to speak it than to translate into brick or steel. And it scaled. Now remember, this is the post-war boom. Marshall Plan rebuilds in Europe launched from 1948, dam building in India, new capitals, new ports. Then decades later, China pushed the throttle. In one generation, 40-story apartments rose beside ring roads that didn't exist the year before. Bridges arrived in families. Rail viaducts marched province to province. Cement kilns fed on limestone and coal, and every pour pulled in aggregate by the mountain. If you looked at it from orbit, new concrete glowed in strips and rectangles. But concrete isn't one thing, it's a crowd. The paste, cement, and water binds the skeleton, sand and gravel. The skeleton is where the volume lives, and volume meant sand. Asphalt wants it too, so do glass foundries and fiber optics. Your phone's glass, your office's facade, the fiber in the street, all carry sand's signature. The quantities stretch the mind. Tens of billions of tons of aggregate moving each year, UNEP, mostly short distances, mostly unnoticed. The trick is that sand looks abundant until a crane shows up. Then it's scarce within a 6-hour truck loop. Here's the math that trapped us. Sand is heavy and cheap per ton. Move it too far and it stops being cheap. Double the distance and you can double the delivered price. No spreadsheet needed. Ask any contractor on a thin bid. That means the only sand that matters is the sand close enough to pour. The rest is a postcard. So when a city announces a ring road, stadium, and housing drive, everyone does the same calculation. What pits exist within radius, which river reaches can be tapped, whose quarries can be permitted, and who can get the trucks rolling by dawn. If the pits are tied up or environmental rules tight without a plan, the cranes won't slow down, they'll hunt other sources. That's how night dredging shows up. Not because the world ran out of sand, because the project ran out of legal sand within range. Boom-bust cycles made it worse. Stimulus packages swing like wrecking balls through procurement calendars. Olympic bids, expos, megaprojects, spikes hit irregularly. Plants staffed for a steady pace get whiplash. Regulators writing rules for a normal year suddenly face 10 abnormal months. And while hearings run long, a metro line demands tonight's base course. That gap between paperwork and pour becomes an opportunity, first for corner cutting, then for a market with its own rules. What wasn't obvious at first, because nobody needed to know, was how grain shape would gatekeep the whole system. Desert dunes roll like silk but don't lock in concrete. Those grains are too rounded to grip the cement paste. River, lake, and nearshore sands are angular, the product of fracture and short transport. They've got edges. Edges matter when you're stacking floors or spinning pylons. So the infinite desert we all picture might as well be flour in this recipe. Useful for some tasks, wrong for the main course. Meanwhile, the modern economy kept adding concrete jobs nobody thought of as concrete jobs. Data centers need massive slabs, thick walls, tunnels for cabling, pads for transformers. Wind farms want foundations as wide as houses. Logistics parks sprawl in rectangles you can see from space. Each one is a line item of sand. Your streaming habit rides on a poured floor. Parallel to that, coastal cities gambled on land itself. Reclamation looks like free real estate until you ask what fills the sea. Sand. Singapore imported it by the hundreds of millions of tons across decades, and neighbors noticed their shores slip. Export bans followed, then new suppliers, then darker channels. Again, distance decided the profits. Islands stood between a city and the nearest dredge. This was the quiet lock-in. Construction norms, codes, procurement budget cycles assumed sand would be there, assumed trucks would arrive, assumed a quarry would expand. Under those assumptions, a kind of empire settled in. Concrete promised certainty, pour it today, open it next month, collect value for years. Politicians like ribbon cuttings, developers like predictable schedules, banks like collateral you can photograph. Concrete gives you all three, and sand keeps the promise. Then came the hairline cracks, a bridge pier exposed by a dropped riverbed, a farmer's well gone salty near a coast, a lawsuit over a collapsed bank after flood season, a project manager's text, costs up, deliveries late, find more. The empire continued anyway, because habit is cheaper than reform until it is. To understand why legal supply would fail even as demand was obvious, follow that 6-hour trucking loop. It's short, crowded, and easy to monetize in quiet ways. A permit here, a shortcut there. The river carries the rest, and when it doesn't, someone makes it carry at night. The wrong sand problem. Why the desert can't save us. Here, that's where the story keeps getting derailed. Those endless dunes look like salvation. They aren't. Grain shape decides whether a mix locks up or slips, and wind-tumbled desert sand is all slip. Decades of abrasion round each grain into a tiny sphere. In concrete, those spheres behave like ball bearings. The cement paste can't bite, interlock vanishes. Engineers see it in creep, shrinkage, and deflection numbers that don't behave. A floor that looks fine on day one sags seasons later. Codes don't gamble on vibes. They bake in friction and contact area because buildings don't get second chances. River, lake, and nearshore sands come from short, violent journeys. Fracture makes edges, edges create hooks. At the microscopic level, those hooks key into the paste and each other, raising compressive strength at a given water-cement ratio and holding shape under load. Asphalt wants the same thing. Rounded grains shear when summer softens the binder. Angled grains resist rutting. Swap shapes and you buy a maintenance budget you didn't plan for. Mixed design isn't cement plus whatever fits a shovel. It's a graded puzzle. Coarse, medium, fine, the right proportions pack voids so paste fills spaces instead of drowning the mix. Surface area drives water demand. Rounded grains have less interlock, so you chase workability with water. More water lowers strength, so you chase strength with more cement. More cement raises heat and shrinkage, so you chase cracking with admixtures. Each fix compounds cost and risk. On a mock-up, you can baby a batch and hit the target. On a megacity schedule, batch-to-batch drift turns small errors into loud problems. People tried making dunes behave. Screen desert sand into tighter bands, recombine dose superplasticizers, add mineral fines, even toss in fibers. Under lab control, you can stand up beams and print charts that look great. The asterisks are brutal, relentless QC, tight moisture control, disciplined curing, and higher binder content to compensate for lost interlock. That's boutique concrete, fine for a signature arch or stadium rib where cost flexes and crews are elite. It doesn't feed kilometers of viaducts, mid-market towers, and slab-on-grade warehouses every week. Glass doesn't bail you out either. Float lines and container plants need clean silica with chemistry and grain-size windows you don't get by scooping a dune. Salts, clays, and trace metals push melt behavior off script. Washing is water-intensive. Haul water to deserts or haul sand to water and the cheap part evaporates. Even chip-grade silicon starts with quartz that passes impurity thresholds. That's geology plus logistics, not a TED Talk hack. Salt is the quiet saboteur. Many coastal dunes store chlorides that bleed into concrete. Chlorides accelerate rebar corrosion. Rust swells, cracks widen, decks spall. Yes, you can wash. In dry places, washing is a fantasy or a groundwater theft. Again, distance and water erase the bargain. The physics never left. The invoice just arrived late. Codes enshrine all this. Specifications cap silt, chlorides, and organic content. They require grading curves and angularity indices. If your sand flunks, a licensed engineer stamps no. That stamp is a firewall built from failures that already happened somewhere else. Occasional headlines, desert sand concrete breakthrough, hide caveats in the methods section, special binders, tight grading, limited scope, higher cost, and relentless QC. You can do it sometimes, not everywhere. So serious builders moved a different way, make the right sand. Crush rock into controlled shapes, tune fines with air separators, wash consistently, and design mixes around manufactured sands quirks. You gain angularity and control. You inherit dust management, slightly higher water demand, and chemistry you need to watch for alkali-silica reaction. With a lab that actually runs tests and a plant that holds power, it works. It's in codes. It scales better than fantasy dune. There's a reason the desert myth won't die. It's comforting. It shifts pressure away from the rivers and deltas that feed cities and farms. If the public believes in an infinite alternative, resistance to ripping riverbeds weakens. But distance still rules the math. Sand is cheap until you move it. The infinite dunes are usually hundreds of kilometers from the crane. Every extra kilometer doubles pain somewhere: fuel, tires, time, fines, or failures. Ask engineers what sand they want. The answer's blunt: the sand that meets spec within radius. That's why rivers and nearshore deposits become targets first. Angular grains, short hauls, stable costs. When those choke, you have three honest choices: pay for crushed and police quality, redesign to use less, or go dark. One path builds a market you can audit. One squeezes demand with better design. The last turns a river into a ledger nobody signs and everyone pays. The gold rush you missed. Legal supply cracks. While committees drafted guidelines, bulldozers followed phone calls. Regulations didn't collapse, they just moved slower than cranes. Permits for river dredging, pit expansions, and shoreline borrow sites took months. Housing drives, ring roads, and metro lines needed aggregate tomorrow. That lag created an arbitrage, legal sand on paper, missing trucks in practice. Into that gap, a new economy laced its boots. On paper, the machinery looked careful. Dredging licenses capped tonnage by reach and season. Zoning drew buffers. Environmental clearances required silt curtains, bank stabilization, fish-friendly calendars. All smart if you can staff enforcement, audit loads, and pause a pour without a politician calling your boss. In reality, files moved, mixers didn't. Contractors stared at liquidated damages and called whoever could promise dawn. Coping beat compliance at first. A pit owner with a valid boundary offered advanced deliveries over the fence line. A loader operator shifted from day to night. A weighbridge clerk discovered the ghost ticket: one load, two slips, three invoices. These weren't mafias. They were survival tactics squeezed between targets and red tape. But survival tactics scale fast when margins appear. Measuring extraction in moving rivers is hard even when everyone's honest. A reach could be within quota in government folders and stripped to stone by morning because the river doesn't keep ledgers, trucks do. Duplicate manifests turned over-limit dredging into compliance. The arithmetic looked fine until the banks slumped and wells coughed air. Inspectors rotated, districts stretched thin, and a few cozy relationships multiplied the slippage. Community pushback landed next. Wells dropped, banks collapsed, court petitions piled up. Judges facing real harm issued moratoria, blanket bans on river mining, pauses on coastal borrow, pit closures pending impact reviews. Intent protection, ground effect, scarcity under calendars that didn't shrink, trucks queued at the few legal pits, prices jumped. A 6-hour radius tightened to 3 because each extra kilometer now cost more than the last. Scarcity fattens margins. Ban the legal option and midnight becomes premium. Boats ran AIS dark. Excavators reached from private fields at low flow. Lookouts texted when headlights crested a bend. With profit came muscle, windshields smashed, stockyards torched, threats delivered as quiet visits. Demand didn't fall, it shifted channels and learned to defend itself. Pressure bled across borders. A city that shut its river pits shopped in the next district, then the next state. Each boundary added tolls, official and otherwise. Suddenly, manufactured sand penciled in one metro, but not another where crushers sat too far or power sputtered at noon. Procurement built to lowest bid watched offers balanced compliance on paper against gray sourcing in practice, and no one could prove which side of the line a grain had crossed. Paper games matured. Contracts paid per cubic meter placed, not per origin proved. Contractors inflated bulk densities, shaved gradations, and blended legal with midnight at depots tucked behind walls near ring roads. Auditors tested lab samples a careful foreman could game by scooping the cleanest corner. The system asked for stamps, the river paid in meters. Zoom out and the rhyme repeats. Delta regions in China tightened river extraction. Demand hopped inland to quarries and crushers, raising transport costs and shifting impacts. In West and East Africa, offshore dredging fed urban build-outs while coastal erosion sparked local fury. In the Gulf, licenses assumed benign dynamics until nearshore shifts forced rule changes and price spikes. Different policies, same math. The closer the sand, the cheaper the project looks, until the ledger adds repairs. Brokers stitched the new market. They knew which officer was on leave, which bend was quiet, which pit owner needed cash. They married boat owners to fixers and folded complicit officials into the chain. A hush-money economy formed, diesel, envelopes, retainer fees disguised as site support. At dawn, the same trucks that hauled compliant loads carried midnight sand on the return. Enforcement hit the visible nodes. Seize a dredge, arrest a pilot, suspend a permit. The network adapted. Smaller boats, shallower drafts, land-based skimming with long-armed excavators, pop-up stockpiles that laundered origin. Drones flew after tips, hoses curled into channels from pickups hidden in cane. Seizures made headlines, deliveries made deadline. Public budgets learned the cost. Procurement that equated compliance with a stamp-baked risk into schedules. When roads rutted early, maintenance swelled. When bridges saw unexpected scour, emergency works drained contingency lines. Insurance priced new river hazards. Taxpayers paid whether the sand was legal or not. Meanwhile, honest alternatives struggled under the same clock. Manufactured sand plants needed crushers, power, washing, and lab discipline. Financing hinged on offtake certainty. If shadow supply undercut by skipping royalties and safeguards, plants bled. Without pre-qualification and traceable receipts, the clean option lost to the option that could promise dawn. This was the pivot. A gray market became an industry. Not movie villain flashy, just cooler boxes on boats, prayer flags on dashboards, ledgers in pencil. Territory hardened at the waterline. Rates stabilized. Paperwork learned to pass a glance. And once a shadow supply chain delivers certainty, it sells certainty like a product. The legal framework never disappeared. It just got outpaced by cranes, distances, and incentives. The trucks kept rolling, the river kept paying, and a resource that everyone assumed would arrive by morning learned to arrive by midnight at a price nobody wrote into the tender. Birth of the sand mafias. They didn't arrive with rifles, they arrived with schedules. The first deal sounded like a favor, one extra truck before dawn so a slab wouldn't miss its window. A backhoe dipped into a quiet bend, a pump hummed from the bed of a pickup under a tarp. The poor held, penalties didn't, everyone slept. The second favor came easier. By the third, a pattern had a name. Stakes were immediate. Miss a morning pour and you pay twice. Idle cruise today, claims tomorrow. Crane time bleeds by the hour. Politicians who promised openings don't accept excuses about fish ladders and silt curtains. A foreman under that pressure makes a short call. A cousin knows a broker. The broker knows a bend. The bend yields for a price. Meanwhile, the chain assembles itself. A broker with two phones learns the river's moods, which bar sits above low flow, which guard drinks tea at 2, which junior officer rotates next week. He recruits boatmen who have read currents since they were kids, loader operators who can run blind, weighbridge clerks who can print a duplicate without blinking. He doesn't argue with physics, he argues with time. His pitch is simple, you will pour. Paperwork follows. It always does. Ghost tickets multiply loads without moving a grain. Bulk densities creep up on invoices by 2 decimals. QR codes appear on manifests that scan perfectly and still lie about origin. Stockyards behind brick walls blend clean pit stock with midnight haul and turn both into compliant. Lab tests pass because a careful foreman samples the good corner. Compliance becomes a performance. What nobody planned on was territory. Once a bend proves reliable, it becomes turf. First come warnings, keep your hose out of our reach, then rocks from a dark bank, then tires slashed, a pump sabotaged, a loader burned, A patrol jeep's windshield stars under a sling. A night pilot vanishes and returns with a limp and a new job. Fear maps the river more reliably than any survey. The money isn't abstract. It wears school uniforms and pays hospital bills. A loader-operator signs a loan for his own machine, collateralized by future illicit tonnage. A constable's brother lands security at a stockyard. A local politician arranges community compensation, water tankers, temple paint, a youth club's jerseys. Kickbacks get laundered through consultancy fees and equipment rentals. By the time cash touches a campaign, it's in a soup. Micro-stories make the ledger personal. A fisherman kills his lamp when a suction hose hisses too close and watches his net snag on steel he can't see. He drifts and memorizes faces. A junior revenue officer photographs fresh cuts at noon, files a report and finds a note on his bike. Nights aren't yours. A weighbridge clerk keeps 2 stamps in a drawer. One pays rent, the other pays for his daughter's exam prep. City Hall performs deterrence. Cameras roll as an excavator is seized. Headlines praise a task force. Drones fly once. 2 nights later, 5 smaller boats replace the one that posed for the photo. Brokers split cargo into shallower drafts. Pumps move into sugarcane and snake hoses over levees from private land. Checkpoints become suggestions when drivers learn the right names to say and the right cash to fold. Offshore, a parallel arm grows slicker. Small barges kiss shoals where AIS goes conveniently faulty. Borrow areas on paper don't match the sea's memory. Manifests ride under flags that switch in calm water. Marine sand compliant appears on pristine invoices while fishers complain of dead grounds. That branch wears safety vests by day and rubber boots by night. Violence doesn't spike once, it ratchets with margins. As bans tighten and legal supply thins, premiums fatten. With premium comes protection. A rival crew eats a beating. An inspector's hut burns. A reporter who filmed plate numbers on the river finds a scooter shadowing her route home for a week. A district collector pushing fixed extraction points gets transferred before the monsoon. The market punishes scruples. A contractor who insists on traceability loses 3 bids. A builder who refuses gray supply misses quarterly handovers and watches a competitor sell early. Bankers mark execution risk in clean tenders and reliable performance in those backed by shadow certainty. Ethical stands turn into line items labeled delay. Meanwhile, honest plants grind. A manufactured on line dials its gradation, washes fines, runs QC twice a shift, and still loses lots to a depot blending cheaper midnight stock into its deliveries. The plant owner gets blamed for workability drift he didn't cause. He tightens testing, eats rejections, and calls the procurement officer who shrugs at paperwork that looks perfect. Territory calcifies into rules. Crews run convoys. Lookouts text plate numbers from culverts. Shifts run like factory lines, 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., then silence by dawn. Ledgers in pencil track who loaded where, who owes what, who's protected and who isn't. A missed payment gets settled with slashed hoses. An argument over a bend gets settled with fire. Enforcement learns and adapts, but slower. Seizures spike after a viral clip, then trend back to normal. New task forces arrive, old networks change bends, drones move to a calendar, pumps move to a hedge. Officers who push too hard find their families getting late calls. The ones who don't push get promoted. By the time officials name it Mafia, the system has already matured. In Rajasthan, crews linked to codes like 44, 4700, and BMC turned bends into turf and invoices into armor, an ecosystem documented in regional probes and court filings. It isn't a headline. It's a supply chain with night hours, informal insurance, and customer service that answers the phone at 1 a.m. It sells the one thing the legal market couldn't guarantee under pressure: certainty. Certainty keeps cranes turning, and cranes keep politics smiling. The river pays the invoice. The rest of us pick up the tip. Hotspots: India's deadly river trade. India turns the shadow market into a daily shift. Expressways, metros, dams, coastal defenses. Every schedule is tight, every pore unforgiving, and the right sand lives inside rivers that also water fields and fill taps. That overlap puts livelihoods on one bank and loaders on the other, and the river in the middle takes the hit. Start with the Yamuna near Delhi. Court orders banned stretches, patrols filmed daytime raids, and TV anchors declared victories. Nights told a different story. Backhoes eased down embankments without lights. Mobile pumps ran from pickups hidden behind sugarcane. A fisherman working shallow nets learned new sounds. The low thrum of diesel, the hiss of a suction hose, the sudden quickening of current when a bar let go. By morning, the waterline cut cleaner, deeper. Inspectors showed up weeks later with clipboards and found hairline cracks at bridge approaches and scour readings creeping past comfort. The official notes spoke in engineering. The river had already given its verdict. On the Ganga's middle reaches, temple towns watched pilgrims wade at odd angles as sandbars flattened. Truck convoys queued before sunrise at tin-wall depots, blending compliant pit stock with nocturnal take. Bulk density on invoices made loads look honest. Chloride and silt tests passed because sampling was careful. Wells that had held for decades suddenly rasped, the groundwater table dragged down by a bed that kept dropping. Brackish taste crept inland after harsh tides. Farmers pulled deeper, burned more diesel, and ran thinner margins. Slide west to the Narmada. A ring road and a metro drove demand straight through a spawning window. Permits paused, schedules didn't. Crews skimmed low-flow bars, then left before the afternoon patrol. A sub-inspector tried to hold a line. 2 machines seized, photos filed, GPS pins sent up the chain. Weeks later, a small fire bloomed outside his door before dawn and died on the concrete like a warning. He rotated to a desk job. The river didn't rotate. Down on the Godavari Delta, harm ran in stereo. Offshore winds and tides bit at a coast starved of nearshore sediment. Inland, channels remapped themselves around missing bars. Prawn nurseries fogged with silt. Fishers folded nets by noon and argued about debt. A schoolteacher started taking photos from the same stake each Sunday. The bank behind it retreated like a tear-off calendar. He mailed prints and coordinates to an office that replied with a stamped receipt and a silence that lasted a season. Numbers exist when anyone counts. Across India, a civil society review of media reports tallied at least 418 dead and 438 injured in just 16 months, from December 2020 to March 2022, in accidents and violence tied to sand mining, SANDRP. The categories read like a ledger of avoidable loss: drownings in pits left by excavators, crews buried by collapses, road crashes in overloaded convoys, beatings and killings in turf disputes, officers and journalists run off roads or worse. Those are the names we can see. There's no official registry. Families learned to grieve without paperwork. Journalists tried to stitch a public record and paid for it. A reporter on the Yamuna filmed number plates at 2 a.m. A scooter started tailing her home the next week. In Madhya Pradesh, a camera caught barges clustering under a bridge before dawn. The calls that followed asked about routes and routines in voices that didn't bother with names. Some cases made headlines. A young reporter shot after exposing a brick kiln's sand link. Activists pulled from bikes and lost to canals labeled accident scenes. The patterns outlived the news cycle. Enforcement scaled on paper. Special task forces formed. Drones flew. Machinery lined up in seizure photos like trophies. For a week, silence. Then the network adapted: smaller pumps, longer hoses, private land access, convoys rerouted along farm tracks. Weybridges upgraded software. Ghost slips gained QR codes that scanned fine while origins didn't. Compliance became a choreography. Clean samples, tight labels, stamps in order. Rivers don't read stamp. Not every district surrendered. Some drew fixed extraction points away from bends and bridges, published quotas tied to measured replenishment, and set no-take seasons around fish life cycles rather than fiscal calendars. Community committees watched bank lines and called hotlines tied to real rewards: diesel vouchers for verified tips, suspensions for officers who ignored them. One metro rewrote specs to accept high-quality manufactured sand with rigorous testing and published weekly source lists. Complaints about plaster defects dropped. River shares fell by real percentages. These wins were fragile, and they depended on capacity that could be transferred or retired with a signature. Micro-stories keep the scale honest. A Yamuna boatman sells a net to buy diesel and starts ferrying drums for a broker on nights when fish vanish. A Narmada constable rotates back from leave and asks for a different beat because his cousin just got hired to guard a stockyard. A Godavari farmer deepens a well twice, then gives up and sends his younger brother upriver to a crusher plant. A Weybridge clerk's daughter walks to school with a new backpack bought on wages that came from the second stamp. The state wasn't absent, it was outpaced and out-incentivized. Elections needed funding, contracts greased loyalties, transfers moved problems, tender committees argued definitions, floodplain versus channel, and opened bids that split sources, manufactured, compliant river reach, and supplemental. Everyone understood what supplemental meant. The only thing that changed was who got paid to keep the night quiet. India isn't an outlier, it's a magnifier. Where growth, rivers, and weak traceability meet, the same story plays. But the country's scale and speed make the costs visible in human time. Bridges don't fail in theory, they get divers at dawn. Wells don't trend down, they cough air. And the people who live on the river's edge learn the rules first because they feel the current change under their hands before anyone prints a chart. Singapore's giant appetite and vanishing neighbors. While India's rivers fought a ground war, the sea carried a quieter one. Singapore needed land, runways, ports, housing on an island barely bigger than a city borough. The only direction left was outward. Reclamation sounds orderly. In practice, it's millions of tons of sand pushed into the shallows until coastlines redraw themselves. Inside the harbor, it looked like logistics. Barges in lines, pumps drumming, new plots drying under a sun that schedules work like a metronome. From the city-state's vantage point, this was survival. No hinterland, high stakes, and a promise to keep homes affordable and industry humming. Sand became a budget line like fuel. Volumes rose into the hundreds of millions of tons across decades, and the shoreline marched with engineering confidence. Polders, sea walls, runway extensions, each defense against rising seas needed the very material waves rearrange. The numbers made sense on ledger paper. They rang like alarms across the strait. Indonesia felt it first. The Riau Islands, close enough to watch Singapore's skyline sharpen on clear mornings, fed the trade. Dredgers shaved protective shoals that once broke waves for small boats. Villagers watched the tide push farther each season, nibbling fields and schools that maps still insisted were inland. When officials counted losses and found islands effectively erased, Jakarta slammed an export ban. National security on the masthead, survival at the shore. Bans rerouted more than they reduced. Demand stayed, manifests learned new names. Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia shouldered the flow in phases, each country with its own rules and flashpoints. Nearshore extraction looked harmless until beaches thinned, mangroves retreated, and shrimp nurseries turned to stirred mud. Fishers measured the change in empty nets and hull repairs. Towns measured it in meters of coast lost each storm season. Export licenses tightened. Brokers adapted. Smuggling learned the channels like the people who once fished them. AIS trackers went faulty in familiar shoals. Flags switched on calm water. Burrow areas listed on forms didn't line up with any chart. A barge left one coast heavy and arrived light after an unlogged pause at midnight. Paper called the cargo fill. Locals pointed at new cuts. Diplomacy strained to hold two truths at once. Singapore insisted on legal sourcing and tightened procurement. Neighbors carried visible scars and angry constituencies. Meetings read like careful apologies laminated over resentment. Meanwhile, the machine at Tuas kept time. Ports consolidated into a megahub. Housing rose in careful grids. Planners balanced flood risk, land scarcity, and storm projections with the precision of a shipping schedule. Reclamation fed resilience plans, the irony layered but real. Remove sand near shore and you can make ground to build walls against the sea that asks for it back. Engineers did what engineers do, mitigate, monitor, and adjust. The sea wrote in currents, not memos. Micro-stories cut through policy. In Kep and Kampot, Cambodian families rebuilt crab traps with thinner bamboo after old ground silted. In Vietnam's Mekong fringes, a sandbar that once softened swell sank, and a line of houses tilted toward brown water. In Johor, social feeds showed shoals shaved flat. Fishermen petitioned for compensation that arrived as fuel vouchers and nods. Vouchers don't anchor a boat in a storm. Money rewired local politics. A provincial officer who flagged suspicious movements met a transfer letter. A marine patrol received new engines but not enough fuel. A mid-level broker opened a seafood restaurant that never had customers and always had cash. The chain reached from muddy decks to air-conditioned conference rooms where contracts wore embossed logos. On paper, cargoes were compliant. Offshore, the sea kept the ledger with eroded bank. Singapore wasn't a cartoon villain. It pushed standards forward, invested in manufactured alternatives, audited suppliers, and talked openly about sustainable sources. But scale has gravity. When a city that precise and wealthy needs sand, the region listens and some parts answer in whispers. Export bans hardened into distrust that won't fade with a single memorandum. Insurance recalculated coastal risk. Local elections leaned on promises to police dredgers that voters could see with binoculars. The market's adaptive genius stayed the constant. When bands closed one strait, contracts shifted to longer hauls and higher prices. Distance ate margins, margins chased shortcuts. Some reclamation cells took marine sand from licensed pits with observers on board and AIS blinking. Others took cargo described the same and sourced differently. On shore, fill compacted, instruments nodded, schedules held. Offshore, fishers learned new routes to avoid cables, pipes, and freshly deepened lane. There were bright spots. Trials in manufactured sand for concrete, stricter transparency around marine borrow areas, and public AIS dashboards that let watchdogs cross-check routes. When visibility rose, vessels took cleaner lines and complaints dipped. But visibility is labor, and labor needs budgets that outlast headlines. The temptation to treat sand as a quiet input never goes away. In the end, Singapore's appetite told a regional story in miniature. A legitimate need colliding with fragile governance and a physics problem that punishes distance. The city grew with meticulous care. The neighbors paid with land they couldn't replace, and a sea that never forgets who moved what, where, and when. The price of progress. Environmental collapses. The first invoice arrives as silence. A lowered riverbed doesn't shout. It speeds the flow, scours deeper, and inches the bottom down until banks that held for decades let go. Roots dangle like torn stitches. In the next heavy rain, the channel claws sideways. A farmer wakes to find a straight line cut through his field, edges so clean they look planned. Upstream, divers check a bridge that suddenly stands taller because water left. Tilt gauges whisper a new story. The road stays open. The hazard color shifts, and maintenance crews start sleeping with their boots on. Underground, the drop tugs the water table with it. Shallow wells cough air. Hand pumps spit grit. The contractor who sold you the last bore slips a business card through the gate, points to a deeper rig, and quotes a price that tastes like debt. In coastal plains, the gradient flips. Salt pushes inland. You taste it first, tea that bites, vegetables that brown on the edges. Plaster cracks climb walls as brine wicks up from foundations. Filters get bought before school shoes do. A water bill inches up because the old intake stranded above low flow, and a new one had to be built out, farther, deeper. Fish read these shifts before any meter does. Flatten a bar and the nursery goes with it. Side eddies that once held larvae turn to straight, fast water. Nets come up lighter than stay folded. River dolphins thread new channels drawn by night crews and drown in gillnets that had once hung clear. Turtles lose beaches when slopes steepen, and waves reach a meter farther with each storm. Shorebirds find drop-offs where a gentle shelf used to be and leave early hungry. A biologist marks fewer dots on a clipboard and stops promising students they'll see what last year saw. Near shore, the coast keeps a ledger in meters lost. Remove sand in the wrong cells and storm seasons collect early. A beach steps back a few footprints each winter until a cafe's owner rolls pallets to keep tables dry. Insurance underwriters don't visit with cameras at low tide. They adjust models. Premiums rise for homes behind an innocuous dune. Deductibles swell until a middle-class policy becomes a dare. Municipal budgets bend to pour emergency berms, truck in fill that dissolves by spring, and stamp temporary on a project that returns every year like a holiday with no gifts. Infrastructure ages in dog years when beds drop. Designers account for scour up to a point. Past that, piers lose embedment, abutments hang, and Gabion mattresses unzip. The fix is always sudden. Rock dumped into holes that didn't exist last season. A line item labeled urgent jammed into a council session. Nobody pretends it's mysterious. You pull sediment from a live system, the system finds it at your footing. The physics is dull. The bill is not. Hidden costs outrun any bribe or discount at the riverbank. A municipality buys midnight sand through a clean invoice, then funds flood repairs the same extraction helped trigger. Taxes mop what margins spilled. Add the lines nobody consolidates, a fishery that won't return, a school that relocates away from a dangerous bank, a clinic that replaces corroded fixtures because chloride counts spiked after a spring tide pushed farther inland than memory. A contractor signs off on a compaction curve that looks neat. 2 coves away, boats move because swell wraps in new ways around a shoal that isn't there. Micro-stories carry the weight. A hospital orders a new reverse osmosis unit and postpones hiring a nurse. A bridge inspector quietly doubles dive checks and avoids using the word unanticipated. A farmer pays for deeper diesel pumping and drops a crop. His son takes a job hauling aggregate that deepened the problem. A hotel paints over salt bloom, photographs sunrise at a tighter angle to hide the retreat, and adds a resilience surcharge to the bill. The climate overlay sharpens every edge. Bigger storms take cleaner bites. Deltas, already starved of sediment by upstream dams and night crews, settle faster. Sea level adds height to every surge. A mangrove fringe that might have taken the punch stepped back because the platform beneath it was shaved. You can name the cyclone. You can't name the crews that nicked the platform, but they're stapled to the damage report, whether the report admits it or not. Some places tried to move slower than the river. Quotas tied to measured replenishment, fixed extraction points away from bends and bridges, no-take seasons aligned with fish life cycles, buffers based on bank material rather than round numbers, satellite passes and drones that fly on a schedule, not just after tips. Where this stuck, collapses softened. But capacity is a moving target. One transfer can undo a season's discipline. The market rarely waits for pilots to become policy. In the aftermath, communities adapt like water does. They move. A row of houses steps back one plot. A shrine relocates. A fisherman sells his boat and buys a motorbike to haul bagged concrete. The sand he carries might be the last his village could afford to lose. Growth happened. The invoice arrived split across departments and years. The river knows who signed. It wasn't the people who paid. Following the money, the $70 billion market. If the river tells you where the sand came from, the ledger tells you why it kept moving. Start at the line items no one reads. Aggregate, fill, transport, site prep. Each sounds harmless. Put them together and you've got a market measured in tens of billions of dollars once you fold the clean invoices into the gray cash that never sees a bank. Public works feed it. So do private towers, logistics parks, and data centers. Your taxes and your rent are both in there, paying for certainty at dawn. Follow a single grain as it becomes revenue. At the river, extraction pays crews and diesel. A broker adds a fee for assurance. A loader bills per cycle. The weighbridge sells tickets. Trucking multiplies everything. Fuel, road tolls, gate fees, and the informal charges that turn a checkpoint into a toll booth with no receipts. A depot blends, washes, and stores, then sells a gradation report that looks pretty under a lab stamp. A ready-mix plant adds another slice to cover downtime risk. By the time the grain meets cement, 5 or 6 margins have stacked. None of them include the river's repair bill. Public procurement supercharges the spread. Contracts pay per cubic meter placed, verified by density and lab tests blind to origin. That's the door ghost tonnage prefers. Duplicate trips show up on paper without moving a rock. Bulk densities nudge up by convenient decimals. Wastage allowances mop the rest. A contractor submits for 10,000 cubic meters, 8,500 arrive. The difference exists only on a spreadsheet and a remittance labeled consulting. Kickbacks don't wear ski masks. They wear invoices for equipment rental to a shell firm with a cousin's name. Bid rigging isn't cinematic, it's calendared. 3 haulers agree on zones. One wins the ring road, one the viaduct, one the airport apron. Prices stay inside a band that looks competitive but never dips below the cost of shadow supply. A new entrant finds pits unavailable, trucks committed, and enforcement unusually attentive. Lowest bid wins on paper. Predetermined certainty wins in practice. Money doesn't just move downstream, it moves sideways into politics. A stockyard donates to a youth club. A transport union funds a temple festival. Campaign coffers fatten with community support. In return, transfers slow, inspections soften, and a ban appears with a news crew, then recedes with the tide. The market buys predictability, not miracles. It pays for phones that answer at 1 a.m. Offshore, the ledger rides steel hulls. Marine dredgers book day rates, charterers layer brokerage fees, ports collect dues, flag registries stamp paperwork. When AIS goes faulty and a cargo takes a midnight pause, a second set of books catches it. Cash for captains, risk premiums that look generous until a claim is filed, and traders who prepay loads at discounts steep enough to absorb seizures. A single voyage's spread can underwrite a season of silence. Microstories make the money real. A municipal engineer gets told to shave 5% from a budget he can't move. He trims testing and inspection because trucks won't wait and concrete will. A depot accountant notices a tidy 0.08 bump in build density overmeasured for months, says nothing, and finds a festival bonus in his envelope. A small-town politician campaigns on ending illegal mining, then wins with donations from the same transporters now staffing his rally security. Meanwhile, honest plants fight arithmetic they didn't write. Manufactured sound producers finance crushers, power washing, and labs. Banks ask for offtake certainty. Procurement still awards to the lowest upfront number, which shadow supply can hit by skipping royalties, safety, and treatment ponds. The plant cylinders break fine. The market rewards blended stock with perfect paperwork. The message is clear. Innovate on your own dime and expect to be undercut by people who don't. Consumers pay twice while never seeing their names on the invoice. Insurance recalculates flood risk where beds dropped. Premiums creep. Water utilities shift intakes downstream and deeper. Bills rise. Road repairs arrive early because summer rutting now meets rounded grains and soft binders. Fuel taxes climb to cover unforeseen maintenance. A fiber optic bill hides a duct bank that cost more because compliant sand came from farther away. The ledger disperses pain into monthly payments that no one links to the night boats. The number in the title, call it 70 billion, doesn't land as a single stack of cash. UNEP and industry estimates vary by scope. It arrives as margins clipped at every step and amplified by opacity. You lower it by flipping what you pay for. Put money on performance, longevity, chloride resistance, permeability, verified by randomized third-party tests, and ghost tonnage loses its favorite trick. Tie payments to traceable origins, barcodes linked to GPS pings at source and weighbridge, and invoices that don't match pause automatically. Publish weekly source lists and delivered volumes so watchdogs can cross-check with satellite and AIS. Cash hates daylight. Cartels don't dissolve when you seize a dredge. They shrink when clean competitors can win on a visible field. Pre-qualify legal pits and manufactured sand plants. Lock offtake so banks finance quality. Ban supplemental without origin data. Reward contractors who cut volume through better design and let lenders price the lower risk. When the fastest money lies in audit-ready supply, the midnight network loses its best pitch, certainty. Until those levers move, the river keeps writing invoices in meters and families keep paying in months. The market calls that spread profit. The bridge inspector calls it scour. The fisherman calls it an empty net and a debt he didn't take. Tech fixes, fake fixes, and real constraints. The industry loves a machine you can point at. Don't fight rivers, build crushers. On paper, manufactured sand looks perfect. Crush hard rock, tune particle shape, set fines with air separators, wash consistently, and you've made angular grains on demand. In practice, it's a production line that only works when everything holds. Steady power, clean water, disciplined operators, and a lab that runs tests because trucks are waiting, not because brochures need photo. Stakes live in the margins. Manufactured sand tends to carry more fines and fresh fracture dust. Miss the balance and water, demand jumps. Chase workability with extra water and you trade away strength. Try to claw it back with more cement and you buy heat, shrinkage, and a crack map nobody budgeted. Good plants solve this with tight gradation windows, real-time moisture probes, and wash circuits that keep slimes out. Then the logistics show up. Sludge ponds need land, permits, liners, and maintenance. Communities downhill from those ponds care more about leaks than your gradation curve. Recycled concrete promised a neat loop. Crush the old slab, pull steel, screen, wash, and feed the next pour. It works inside boundaries. Recycled aggregate carries attached mortar that makes particles more porous and fickle. That raises water absorption, shifts workability, and widens variance. It shines in road base, drainage layers, backfill, and precast blocks. You can blend it into structural concrete with strict QA and limited percentages. The sales line. This replaces all natural sand. Breaks on delivery schedules that can't afford variation at scale. Other alternatives arrive with strong resumes. Fly ash and ground granulated slag replace part of cement, cutting carbon and smoothing paste rheology so aggregates pack better. Geopolymers and alkali-activated binders deliver impressive durability in specific settings. Hemp lime, timber concrete composites, low fines mixes, each has niches. But supply chains are thin and codes move slower than press releases. Procurement officers trained to pass audits reach for what labs and lenders already understand. Then the mirage reappears, desert sand fixed by clever chemistry. Labs nurse beams to target strength with special binders, fibers, and ruthless quality control. The caveats bury the headline: higher binder content, relentless moisture management, meticulous curing, tolerant budgets, elite crews, works on signature spans, collapses under a city's weekly appetite. Physics didn't change. The invoice did. Serious builders returned to basics, manufactured sand done right. That means picking rock that breaks into cubical shapes, not flaky shards, running crushers you can dial, keeping power steady in August, installing dust suppression so neighbors keep their windows open, and funding a lab that rejects bad batches even when the site screams. When it clicks, slump holds, finishes behave, and cylinders land where the spec says they should. When it drifts, the fix is process, not prayer. What nobody says loud enough is where the real bottleneck sits: standards and procurement. If the codebook caps manufactured sand at a token percentage, plants die before they scale. If tenders reward the lowest upfront unit price, gray supply that skips royalties and environmental controls undercuts honest plants every time. If labs answer to whoever pays the most, paperwork wins and rivers lose. The fix is dull and powerful. Right performance specs: compressive strength, modulus, permeability, chloride thresholds, shrinkage. Then let any aggregate that passes with traceability compete. Pay for life cycle performance, not the cheapest cubic meter on day one. Traceability is the second lever. Tie barcodes to GPS pings at source and weighbridge. Publish a weekly ledger of sources, volumes, and test results. Randomize third-party sampling at depots and sites. Blind the lab to who's paying. Pause payments when origins don't match. A system like that doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be visible enough that ghost tonnage hates it. Design trims demand faster than any quarry can open. Voided slabs, post-tension floors, composite decks, and smarter spans shave concrete by double digits in routine buildings. Repetition through modular design reduces batch variability and waste. Precast pours in controlled yards, dialing mixes once and reusing forms until quality becomes muscle memory. Each centimeter you don't pour is a convoy you don't summon at 3 a.m. Schedule like supply is a partner. Pre-qualify manufactured sand plants months before foundations. Lock offtake so banks finance crushers, washers, and labs. Stagger peak pours to avoid panic buys. Build monsoon buffers into calendars. Publish source plans so inspectors and communities know when trucks roll and when rivers rest. Microstories show the pivot. An airport concourse switches to voided slabs, trims 18% concrete, and finishes on time because fewer pours meant fewer weather gambles. A housing authority pre-qualifies 3 manufactured sand plants, rotates lots, and sees plaster defects fall because gradation stayed tight. A ready-mix producer funds an independent lab, gets blacklisted by 1 depot for refusing blends, and gains 2 institutional clients who want fewer warranty call. Constraints don't vanish because a brochure says innovation. Power flickers, pumps clog, fines drift with humidity, and the best plant still has bad days. That's why the boring pieces matter most. Performance specs, traceable origins, independent labs, and procurement that pays for durability. The machine on the brochure might start the shift. The system keeps the trucks honest. The enforcement trap. Why bans Backfire? Blanket bans sound brave at a podium. On the riverbank, they sound like margin. When a chief minister announces, no more river mining, the legal channel goes quiet overnight. Demand doesn't. Prices jump. A ton lifted at midnight is suddenly worth 2 lifted at noon. That spread buys new engines, extra lookouts, and silence. Violence gets priced in. Stakes land on real calendars. A city needs base course for tomorrow's asphalt. The ban says wait months for alternatives. Crews idle, penalties trigger, lenders call. A procurement officer who refuses gray supply becomes the story when a rival office finds a solution. Enforcement floods social feeds for a week, seized excavators, top trucks, a drone shot of hoses coiled on gravel. The market treats it like weather. It adjusts routes and hours. The rain returns. Capacity buckles on contact. Rivers cross jurisdictions, revenue, environment, police, ports, each with separate ledgers, none sharing live data. Officers rotate. One district has 5 inspectors, 50 active extraction points, and a drone locked in a cabinet while flight approvals lag. A night constable knows the bend, the boat, and the fact he won't get backup if he stops it. He waves it through and goes home. The ban exists, so does morning concrete. Corruption loves blunt edges. When everything is illegal, everything is negotiable. The signature that once approved a legal reach now rents selective blindness. Rates standardized like tolls. So much to pass a truck, so much for a quiet week, so much for returning a seized machine. A public resource becomes a private road with cash-only booths. People pay without receipts and call it normal. Fragmentation finishes the job. One state bans river mining, the next doesn't. Trucks hop borders, invoices hop categories. Sand becomes fill, fill becomes topsoil. A weighbridge clerk toggles a drop-down. enforcement celebrates seizures at one crossing while the convoy lines up 2 districts away. The river doesn't care where a boundary sits on a map. It reacts to force, not forms. So what actually works? Start with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Zone extraction like surgery. Map live channels, bends, bridges, and spawning grounds. Fix extraction cells on stable reaches with armored banks. Publish the points. Publish quotas tied to measured replenishment, not round numbers. Tie royalty rates to scarcity. Cheaper when the river's fat after monsoon, expensive when it's lean. Let the ledger steer the shovel. Next, change what you pay for. Contracts that reward the lowest unit price invite ghost tonnage. Pay for performance, pavement life, permeability, chloride thresholds, verified by randomized third-party tests. If you deliver durable concrete with manufactured sand or recycled aggregate, you get the same or better money. Suddenly, the cheapest mystery truck loses its edge to the supplier who can prove outcome. Traceability turns rumors into records. Barcodes on loads tied to GPS pings at source and weighbridge. Marine dredgers with AIS data mirrored on a public dashboard. Drones that fly on a timetable, not after tips. Satellite snapshots that watchdog groups and local reporters can query. When a truck's origin doesn't match its invoice, a payment pauses automatically. Money is the most persuasive cop in the chain. Community co-management is the quiet force multiplier. Give villages seats on monitoring committees. Cut them a royalty share into an auditable fund for wells, schools, and floodworks. Tie the payout to verified compliance. Extraction wanders off the fixed point, the community's share drops. Make it pay to call, a small reward for tips that stick, delivered fast and publicly. Now a fisherman's midnight photo triggers a drone, not a shrug. Seasonal windows matter more than slogans. Close cells for fish spawning and high scour months. Open limited ones when flows stabilize. Rotate cells. Leave stretchers to recover. Base bank buffers on soil and root strength, not politics. The river is a factory with maintenance intervals. Treat it like one. Procurement can starve shadows politely. Pre-qualify legal pits and manufactured sand plants. Lock offtake so banks finance crushers, washing, and labs. Publish all delivery receipts weekly with origins. Penalize buyers for undocumented origins, not just sellers for illicit loads. When a municipal engineer's bonus depends on traceable supply, midnight calls lose charm. Protect the people who make that real. Fund independent labs that answer to neither contractor nor client. Ensure officers against retaliation and rotate them with overlap so no gap opens at the bend. Train judges and auditors in river physics so injunctions track hydrology, not headlines. Commit to the boring parts, clean data, shared fast, used. Bans make statements. Systems make concrete. If you want rivers to live and cities to build, swap the megaphone for a map, a ledger, and a clock, and pay only when the map and ledger agree. Builders, playbook. Cut demand without killing growth. If bans are blunt and tech fixes are fragile, builders still control the cheapest ton, the one they don't pour. Start with structure. Slabs carry most of a building's concrete, so lighten them. Voided systems, plastic or recycled cardboard modules, turn solid plates into ribs that deliver the same stiffness with 15–25% less volume. Post-tensioned floors stretch steel to keep spans thin. High-strength mixes shrink column footprints and cut cumulative tonnage without gambling on untested chemistry. None of this is exotic. It's standard practice when owners ask for it in the brief and lenders accept the math. Repetition is the quiet multiplier. Modular grids, consistent base sizes, and families of repeatable elements let crews dial mixes once and ride them. Precast takes that further. Beams, planks, stairs, and facade panels poured in controlled yards with tight QA, then lifted into place. Site waste drops. Batch variability shrinks. Pours consolidate into fewer, better windows. That matters when legal supply is finite and panic buys trigger midnight call. Design around proximity. The 6-hour radius rules economics, so treat it as a design input, not a procurement headache. Map legal pits and qualified manufactured sand plants before foundation drawings lock in. If the nearby crusher can deliver consistent gradation, write it into the spec and pre-qualify it early. Stagger the schedule so peak pours never exceed documented legal offtake. A calendar that respects supply is the cheapest anti-mafia policy you'll ever buy. Manufactured sand behaves if you let it be itself. Don't treat it as a one-for-one swap. Tune mixes. Target a slightly higher fines content where your lab shows best packing. Use superplasticizers to hold workability without chasing strength with cement, and set moisture probes at the plant and the truck chute. Field crews need one rule: adjust with admixture, not water. That is training, not heroics. Put slump, air, and temperature tests on a clock, not a hunch. Thin by intent, not by hope. Composite decks, steel plus a thinner topping. Cut slab volumes while keeping speed. Bubble deck or ribbed slab systems turn solid weight into geometry. In parking and logistics, optimize strip widths and bay spans to reduce beam counts and repetitive rework. On tall buildings, tune column grids to align with mechanical shafts and facade modules so structure and services stop forcing change orders that pour unnecessary cubic meters. Reuse is demand reduction hiding in plain sight. Specify steel where the program allows future flexibility. Paired with composite slabs, it trims concrete. Where concrete is right, designed for deconstruction, bolted connections, accessible couplers, demountable stair flights, and facade panels hung on mechanical fixings. Then document it. A material passport turns tomorrow's demolition into tomorrow's supply chain for schools, clinics, and temporary housing. You still crush some concrete, but less of it. And with provenance, recycled aggregate performs predictably in sub-base and non-structural fills. Procurement sets the weather. Ditch commodity specs that pay for cheap cubic meters and reward performance instead. Compressive strength over time, permeability, chloride thresholds, shrinkage, abrasion. Pay only when randomized third-party tests clear. Require weekly origin disclosure, source IDs, GPS-tied weighbridge receipts, gradation curves, published where auditors and citizens can see them. Make traceability a line item with bonuses for clean chains, and automatic payment holds for mismatches. Supplemental without origin is just shadow. Don't fund shadows. Tie carbon to cash. Embodied carbon caps per square meter move thin slabs, local sources, and manufactured sand from virtue to value. Offer bid credits for transparent aggregate chains and deconstruction plans. Let them break ties the first year, then make them mandatory once the market adjusts. Lenders and insurers will follow the data if you bring it early. Instrument pilot slabs, publish cylinder breaks and permeability, and translate risk into fewer warranty call. Schedule like a grown-up. Lock offtake agreements with qualified plants before excavation. Phase pours to avoid Friday night scrambles. Build monsoon buffers into calendars. Share source plans with inspectors and communities so truck flows have windows and rivers have rests. Pay crews for dawn instead of midnight, and starve the hour where compromises multiply. Train the people who actually decide outcomes. Foremen who understand manufactured sand quirks won't drown a mix at 2 p.m. Lab techs who see fines drifting call the plant before a day turns into a week. Inspectors who know scour and chloride pathways aren't impressed by tidy binders. They ask for permeability and cover depth, not just cube strength. That culture shows up as flat defect curves and quiet maintenance line. Micro-stories cell change. An airport concourse switches to voided slabs, trims almost a fifth of its concrete, and opens earlier because fewer pours meant fewer weather bets. A housing board pre-qualifies 3 local manufactured sand plants and rotates orders. Plaster complaints drop and lenders stop questioning the spec. A city tender pays for pavement life, verified by falling weight deflectometer tests. Contractors redesign sections to slim aggregate without gambling on strength, and rutting claims fade. This isn't austerity, it's clarity. Pour where performance demands it. Cut where geometry and planning let you. Choose sources you can visit before breakfast. Pay for outcomes, not stories. When you treat sand like the limited local resource it is, schedules calm down, budgets stop suffering surprise fees, and rivers get breathing room without telling a growing city to stop growing. The human stories. People caught in the middle. The fisherman wakes before the engines. He knots his net the way his father taught him. Thumb, twist, pull, and slides onto a river that used to idle. The first cast should groan with weight. It doesn't. A low thrum rides up the water from the bend, a pump breathing in the dark. He kills his lantern. The line snags on steel he can't see. By dawn, the current has sharpened. The beach where his boys chase crabs is a steeper step. He rows home with a torn net and a promise he can't keep. Tomorrow will be better. Across the road, a foreman stares at a slab schedule like it's a court order. 8 trucks due by 6 a.m., 5 confirmed, penalties waiting if rebar sits uncovered. He scrolls to a thread saved under a harmless name. The reply is the same as last week. Midnight pickup, cash, no questions, same stockyard. He looks at the crew sleeping against rebar bundles and calculates what honesty costs at this hour. Overtime, a missed pour, a phone call he can't dodge. He tucks an envelope into his jacket and tells himself it's a one-time fix. It never is. Meanwhile, an activist keeps her life in plastic sleeves. Plate numbers, screenshots, stamped petitions, photos of hoses arcing under stars. She answers calls that come late and hang too soon. A man flicked a cigarette into the river last week and said her nephew's name. She moved her files to a friend's house and changed her route. She isn't fearless, she's stubborn. She knows the bend will be quiet for 2 nights after a seizure, then busier than before. She charges her camera anyway. A junior constable learns the river's second language. Headlights that blink twice mean don't, and develops a habit of pausing on the bridge to read the water. He rode up 2 trucks his first month and got a transfer request the next day disguised as a suggestion. He still stops on the causeway at midnight and notes plates he may never file. His sister's wedding is in 6 months. His cousin just took a stockyard job. He turns the bike around when he sees 3 trucks nose to tail. He tells himself he'll pick a fight he can finish. In a 1-room kitchen, a mother rations tea because the tap turned brackish after spring tides. The new filter cost half a month's wages. The water bill crept up after the city extended an intake farther downstream. Her husband wires conduits in towers whose windows he cleans from the outside. Their son learned the word scour from a cartoon of a bridge on the evening news. He asked if their road could fall. She said no, because mothers do. On a creek outside Mumbai, a teenager dives for sand with a hose clenched in his teeth. He learned to equalize by pain, not by training. He lost a friend to a whirlpool that wasn't there last season. His mother thinks he loads boats. He brings home cash in damp notes and says nothing when she blesses his chest with ash. A Weybridge clerk keeps 2 stamps in a drawer. One prints compliance, the other prints school fees. He balances decimals like a diet, 0.8 on density here, 0.12 on wastage there, and prays the lab pulls from the clean pile his boss keeps for visitors. He knows faces by taillights now. He tries not to know names. A crusher plant owner across town stacked loans to do it clean, dust suppression, liners on ponds, a lab that bites. His cylinders break where they should. His trucks get turned away at a depot that blends midnight fines into everything. Complaints land on his desk for a mix he didn't supply. He rewrites procedures, adds training, calls procurement, and hears the phrase that kills businesses softly. Your paperwork looks great. A schoolteacher photographs the same bank stake every Sunday and prints to a wall where a calendar used to hang. The line retreats a handspan some months, a finger's width others. He takes students to the river and teaches them to measure quietly. He tells them science is patience and feels like he's lying. A broker buys a generator for the temple and pays for jerseys for the youth club. People stop asking questions he can't answer. He still carries a burner phone and checks the bend twice before dawn because he knows what certainty costs when it breaks. These lives intersect without meeting. The fisherman's empty net funds the foreman's kept schedule. The activist's photos stall 3 trucks for a week and earn her a new caller. The constable's hesitation saves his door and costs the river another meter. The mother's bill pays for an intake built because beds dropped. The teenager's breath buys someone's compaction test. The plant owner's discipline fails against a stamp. The teacher's wall becomes a ledge. The broker learns to speak softly. They're not villains or saints. They're ballast in a system that spends trust faster than it replaces sand. And every night the river writes the ledger in current, not ink. The lie we tell ourselves. And what breaks it? We like simple comfort. Sand looks endless, beaches stretch, deserts shimmer, trucks arrive when called. If it's cheap by the ton, it must be abundant, and if it's abundant, the price of growth stays steady. That's the lie that lets budgets pass and keeps consciences quiet. It hides the one feature that decides everything, distance. The right sand, angular, clean, graded, only matters within a short haul of where you pour. Beyond that radius, cost doubles while truth stays the same. We confuse categories to protect the story. Sand is sand, but grains that hold a tower are not the dunes in postcards. Desert spheres slide, river and crushed grains lock. Codes know this. They embed angularity, silt limits, and chloride caps so quietly you forget they exist until a lab says no. We downplay those constraints because schedules don't negotiate with geology. Then we reach for phrases like supplemental and temporary to soften midnight decision. Growth metrics help the myth. We count square meters added, lanes laid, megawatts housed. We don't count river meters dropped, wells that turned brackish, or bridges that demanded divers a year early. That ledger sits in other departments, other budgets, other years. The gap is where the shadow market thrives, between what we celebrate and what we repair. The desert miracle survives because it rescues hope without asking for change. Research demos look great under lights, fibers, special binders, perfect curing. The footnotes are deal breakers at city-scale cost, control, trucking. Manufactured sand, properly run, is the real alternative, but it's not a headline. It's discipline, traceability, and contracts that reward performance, not stories. What breaks the lie is new math made public. Start at design. Price material by distance, not wishful averages. Draw schedules that never exceed legal offtake. Put performance at the center. Pay for durability, permeability, chloride resistance, shrinkage verified by randomized third-party tests. If a mix meets targets with manufactured sand, it gets paid. If it can't prove where the aggregate came from, the invoice waits. Traceability is the second lever. Barcodes tied to GPS pings at source and weighbridge. Weekly ledgers, sources, volumes, test results published where auditors, citizens, and competitors can see them. Marine dredgers mirrored on public AIS dashboards so routes match permits. When origins and receipts don't align, money pauses automatically. Cash listens to rules. Markets adjust faster than memos. Standards have to move from ingredients to outcomes. If codes cap manufactured sand at a token percentage, good plants die and rivers fill the gap. Flip it. Right to performance and traceability. Fund independent labs that answer to neither buyer nor seller. Blind sample at depots and sites. Give inspectors authority to halt pours when a batch drifts and protect them when they use it. Aviation got safe by treating every test as real. Concrete can borrow that humility. Procurement can unlearn a reflex. Lowest bid rewards ghost tonnage. Best value pays for life cycle performance. Add embodied carbon caps per square meter. Thin slabs, local sources, and manufactured sand jump to the money column. Build bid credits for transparent chains and deconstruction plans. Let them break ties this year and set baselines next year. Lenders and insurers follow data. Bring them cylinder logs and permeability curves, not slogan. Communities aren't scenery. Give villages a royalty share tied to verified compliance at fixed extraction points. Pay for tips that stick, fast and publicly. Ensure whistleblowers and rotate officers with overlap so gaps don't open at midnight. Train judges and auditors in river physics so orders track hydrology, not headlines. When a fisherman's photo can pause a payment, the network hears it. Builders hold the quiet pivot. Thinware structure allows voided slabs, post-tension composite decks, pre-qualify manufactured sand plants early. Stage pours to avoid panic buying. Treat supply like a partner, not a servant. Pilot, instrument, publish, standardize. When lenders see fewer defect calls and insurers see fewer early repairs, the premium for honesty shrinks. Admit limits. Desert fixes that need boutique chemistry won't feed a megacity. Recycling is real within bounds. Offshore dredging for defense can be lawful, then it must be watched in daylight and capped by the coast that pays. You don't need miracles. You need maps, ledgers, clocks, and the will to connect them. The lie breaks in small places that add up. A district rotates extraction cells and sees fewer bank failures. A metro rewrites specs, plaster defects fall, and bids with traceable aggregates win. A port logs dredgers on a public map, routes change because people watch. None of it is glamorous. All of it is grown-up work. Pay for results, trust with verification, and treat rivers like systems with rates, seasons, and limit. We told ourselves sand was background. It never was. It's the skeleton under the skyline, priced by kilometers and enforced by habit. Change the price signals and the habits follow. The river will show you in meters that it heard you. The real cost of our skylines is written in lowered riverbeds and kitchens paying for water twice. Demand traceability from your city. Demand audits. Demand the river gets a vote. Subscribe if you want more true stories that expose the hidden ledgers under everyday life. And if you're ready to see how concrete's quiet empire shapes the next crisis and the fixes that actually hold, watch the next episode now.